Heavenly Stories.
In the heat of the midday sun, the town of Sychar seemed quiet, almost deserted. The narrow streets, lined with stone houses, were bathed in golden light. Birds chirped lazily from the rooftops, and the distant sound of a flowing stream whispered through the town. At the edge of the village, near Jacob's well, a woman approached carrying a water jar. She walked with careful steps, her mind preoccupied, as if the weight she carried was not just from the jar on her shoulder, but from a lifetime of burdens and whispers of judgment. As she neared the well, she noticed a man sitting on the edge, his robe simple yet radiant in a way that made him seem unlike anyone she had ever seen. His eyes, calm and inviting, met hers briefly, and for a moment, she hesitated, uncertain whether she should speak. The townspeople had always warned her, Samaritans and Jews did not mix, and strangers were to be met with caution. But something about this man felt different, disarming. "Give me a drink," he said, his voice steady yet gentle, cutting through the hum of midday stillness. The woman froze, surprise flickering across her face. "You're a Jew," she said cautiously. "And you ask me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink?" There was incredulity in her tone, a hint of defensiveness, because in her experience, interactions between her people and Jews were usually laced with tension or avoidance. Yet, in that moment, the stranger did not seem to judge her, he simply looked at her with a curiosity that felt almost sacred. Jesus smiled, not with arrogance, but with a quiet assurance that spoke of understanding and acceptance. "If you knew the gift of God," he said, "and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman frowned, unsure of what he meant. "Living water? Sir, you don't even have a bucket, and the well is deep. Where would you get this living water?" Her skepticism was real, grounded in the practical world she knew, a world of hard work, thirst, and survival. Jesus leaned slightly forward, his gaze unwavering. "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman paused, feeling the weight of his words. She was used to people speaking in platitudes, in half-truths or promises that dissolved in the daylight. But there was something in the way he spoke, an authenticity, a certainty, that made her curious despite herself. "Sir, give me this water so I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." Jesus replied softly, "Go, call your husband and come back." A flicker of hesitation crossed her face, then confusion. "I have no husband," she said. Jesus looked at her, his eyes deep, almost piercing, yet filled with compassion. "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is true." The woman's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like this, so directly, yet without condemnation. For the first time, she felt seen, fully and completely, as if the layers she had hidden behind for years were being gently lifted. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from a strange, hopeful realization. "You must be a prophet," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Her mind raced, thinking of the generations of her people, the history of worship and division between Samaritans and Jews. Could it really be possible that this man had come with a message not just for her, but for all who had been judged or rejected? Jesus smiled again, sensing her thoughts. "Believe me, woman," he said, "the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know, we worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet the time is coming, and indeed has come, when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in spirit and truth." The woman felt a shift deep inside her. The walls she had built to protect herself began to tremble. In this moment, at this well in the middle of a hot, dusty day, she glimpsed something she had not dared hope for, a love that transcended her past, her failures, her divisions. She wanted to hold on to it, to understand it, to believe it. "I know that Messiah is coming," she said cautiously. "When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Jesus looked at her with that same steady, compassionate gaze and said, "I, who speak to you, I am he." The woman froze, the words settling over her like sunlight after a storm. In that instant, she knew that her life, her understanding of the world, her very heart, would never be the same. She ran back to the town, leaving her water jar behind, eager to share the revelation she had just encountered. And so began a story that would ripple far beyond the quiet well of Sychar, a story of breaking barriers, of God's love reaching across walls of judgment and division, and of one woman's encounter that would ignite the hearts of many. The woman ran through the dusty streets of Sychar, her footsteps echoing against the stone houses. The midday sun beat down, but she barely noticed. Her heart pounded with a mix of excitement and disbelief. She had just spoken with a man who knew everything about her, everything she had tried to hide, and yet he did not condemn her. Instead, he offered something she had never imagined, living water, a life renewed and unbound by the judgments of men. Bursting into the town square, she found people going about their day, fetching bread, tending to children, carrying baskets of produce. They paused as she approached, noticing the urgency in her eyes. "Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did," she exclaimed breathlessly. Could this be the Messiah? Whispers spread quickly. Some were skeptical, rolling their eyes at her excitement. Others were curious, drawn by the intensity of her words and the sense that something extraordinary was happening. For the first time in a long while, the woman felt a sense of purpose beyond her daily routine, beyond her struggles and social standing. She wanted others to experience what she had felt, the recognition, the acceptance, the hope. Meanwhile, at the well, Jesus waited patiently, watching as people began to gather, drawn by the story of a woman whose life had been touched by truth. He knew her courage, her willingness to speak openly, was the beginning of a ripple effect. One person's encounter with God could ignite the hearts of many. As the townspeople approached, curiosity overcoming hesitation, the woman pointed toward the well. "He is here. He knows everything about us. He knows our past, our struggles, but he doesn't judge. He offers us living water." Her voice trembled, but it carried a conviction that was impossible to ignore. A man in the crowd frowned, skeptical. "What do you mean he knows everything? Who is this man?" The woman's eyes lit up. "I don't know everything yet," she admitted, "but I know this, he is not like any teacher we've known. He sees into your soul, yet his eyes are full of love. He is the Messiah." People began to murmur among themselves, debating whether she was telling the truth or letting her imagination run wild. But a few, curious and desperate for hope, followed her toward the well. They wanted to see this man who spoke of living water, who had opened the eyes of a woman who had long felt unseen. When they arrived, they found Jesus still sitting quietly, as if he had been expecting them all along. His gaze met theirs, calm and inviting. "Come, see for yourselves," he said softly. There was no force in his words, no demand, only an open invitation. Some hesitated, wary of Samaritans or fearful of stepping beyond what their traditions allowed. But the sincerity in the woman's voice, combined with the quiet authority in Jesus' presence, drew them forward. One by one, they began to speak with him, asking questions, sharing their doubts and hopes. And as they listened, something remarkable happened. The walls between Jew and Samaritan, stranger and neighbor, began to dissolve. The conversation shifted from curiosity to deep reflection. People began to realize that Jesus was not merely a man, but a messenger of God's love, bridging divides they had long thought insurmountable. The woman watched as their faces softened, their skepticism giving way to understanding. It was a powerful moment, one that showed how one encounter, one voice, could spark a transformation not just in a single life, but in an entire community. By evening, many of the townspeople had returned to their homes, their hearts stirred and minds full of questions. The woman remained at the well, sitting quietly, reflecting on everything that had unfolded. She had gone from being invisible in her society to becoming the first witness of a new truth. And in that quiet moment, she understood something profound: the living water Jesus offered was not just for her, but for everyone willing to believe, to listen, and to open their hearts. She looked at the sunset painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold. The world seemed different now, full of possibilities, full of hope. And she knew that she would never be the same again. Her encounter with Jesus at Jacob's well had ignited something eternal, a connection to God that no judgment, no past mistakes, could ever erase. The next morning, the woman could hardly sit still. She had to tell others about the man at the well, the one who knew her story and yet offered hope instead of judgment. Word spread quickly through Sychar, and soon, curious neighbors and even some travelers from nearby towns gathered near Jacob's well. They had heard the whispers about the woman's encounter, and though some were skeptical, a part of them wanted to see for themselves. Jesus, meanwhile, moved among them, not hurriedly, not with any pretense, but with the calm authority of someone who knew the hearts of those before him. He spoke in a voice that carried across the stones and streets, gentle yet compelling. "Everyone who thirsts for truth, come and drink. For the water I give is not just to quench your thirst for a moment, but to fill your soul for eternity." People listened, some intrigued, others defensive. The divisions between Jews and Samaritans ran deep. Generations of mistrust and hostility had taught them to see each other as enemies. Yet, here was a man whose presence challenged every assumption they had been taught. He didn't speak of condemnation or superiority, he spoke of understanding, love, and unity. The woman watched closely as her neighbors approached Jesus. Some asked questions about faith, others about God's promises. Jesus answered with clarity and compassion, breaking down barriers they had long thought unbreakable. "The hour is coming," he said, "when you will worship neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. True worshippers will worship in spirit and in truth. God seeks not division, but hearts open to love." One elderly man shook his head, skeptical. "But how can we trust you? We've been told that Jews and Samaritans are separate, that our paths should not cross." Jesus smiled, a look of both empathy and resolve. "Trust comes not from traditions alone, but from the heart. The water I give will spring up within you, beyond what you see, beyond what others tell you. It will heal, it will refresh, and it will unite." The woman stepped closer, feeling a sense of pride and wonder. She had been the first to speak, the first to believe, and now she saw others beginning to open their hearts. People whispered to one another, sharing fragments of the truth they were hearing. Walls that had seemed permanent started to crumble. Even the children of Sychar were drawn near, their small voices asking questions and pointing curiously at Jesus. He knelt to speak with them, his words simple yet profound. "You are loved. You are seen. You are part of a world that God calls good and whole." By mid-afternoon, a small crowd had formed. They were not all believers, but each person carried the spark of curiosity, a glimmer of hope. And the woman watched in awe as Jesus continued, patiently answering questions, offering insights about God's love that transcended heritage, mistakes, and social boundaries. Her heart swelled. She realized that her encounter with Jesus was no longer only personal, it had become a catalyst for change in the entire community. She remembered the shame she once felt for her past, the quiet isolation, the judgments that had surrounded her life. Now, in the presence of Jesus, she saw a new path, one where forgiveness, understanding, and love could flow freely, like water from the well she had come to that morning. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the town in gold and crimson, she knew this was just the beginning. The lessons she had learned, the courage she had found, were gifts she would carry forward, sharing them with anyone willing to listen. And in that moment, she understood something that went beyond any single interaction: the power of one encounter, one voice of truth, could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond what she could imagine. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of freedom and belonging that was unshakable. Her past no longer defined her, her future was alive with possibility. And at the center of it all, by the well in Sychar, stood Jesus, the bridge across every barrier, the giver of living water, the light that would not fade. As the days passed, the story of the woman at Jacob's well spread throughout Sychar like wildfire. People from neighboring towns began arriving, curious to meet the man she had spoken of. Some came with doubt, others with hope, but all were drawn by the story of living water, a promise that seemed to transcend the boundaries of tradition and judgment. The woman, now transformed by her encounter, became a witness, guiding visitors to the well and introducing them to Jesus. She spoke with a newfound confidence, sharing her experience with openness and authenticity. "He knows who we are," she would say. "He knows our past, but he doesn't condemn. He offers us hope, life, and love." Her words carried a sincerity that resonated deeply with those who listened, and even the most skeptical began to feel the stirrings of belief. Jesus welcomed each person with patience and compassion. He spoke of God's love, not as a distant rule to follow, but as a living, breathing presence that could transform hearts. The kingdom of God, he explained, is not about walls, divisions, or who has the right rituals. It is about the heart, about worshiping in spirit and in truth. Anyone who comes seeking will find, anyone who thirsts will be filled. One day, a group of elders approached him, their faces lined with skepticism and years of tradition. "Teacher," one of them said, "we have heard much about your words, but how can a Samaritan woman speak with such authority? Isn't it unusual for a woman, and a Samaritan at that, to lead others in faith?" Jesus looked at them, his gaze steady and kind. "Faith does not come from status, heritage, or gender. It comes from the heart. The woman you see before you has encountered truth, and she has been changed. Her witness is valid because it flows from her experience, not from human convention. Whoever seeks God with sincerity, regardless of background, can be a messenger of his love." The elders murmured among themselves, some hesitant, others intrigued. Slowly, they began to realize that God's work could not be confined to their expectations. The divisions that had seemed unbreakable, between Jews and Samaritans, men and women, insiders and outsiders, were being dissolved by a power they had underestimated. The woman watched as families gathered at the well, asking questions and listening intently. Children laughed and played nearby, their innocence a reminder of the new possibilities that lay ahead. Farmers and merchants, young and old, shared their stories, and Jesus listened with patience and empathy, weaving their experiences into lessons about God's love, mercy, and forgiveness. By midweek, the well had become a place of learning, reflection, and spiritual awakening. People were beginning to see that faith was not a rigid set of rules, but a living relationship with God, a relationship accessible to anyone who came with an open heart. The woman marveled at the transformation she witnessed. A community once divided by suspicion and prejudice was slowly becoming a community united in hope and understanding. As the sun set each evening, casting warm light across the stones of Sychar, the woman would sit by the well, reflecting on how far she had come. She had entered that place burdened by shame, isolation, and doubt. Now, she felt empowered, her spirit filled with a peace and joy she had never known. She realized that her encounter with Jesus was only the beginning of a journey that would ripple outward, touching lives far beyond her own. In her heart, she understood something profound: true change begins with one encounter, one act of faith, one person willing to share the truth. And as she looked at the faces of those gathered around the well, she knew that the living water Jesus offered would continue to flow, transforming hearts, breaking barriers, and bringing hope to everyone who thirsted for it. Word of Jesus' presence spread beyond Sychar, drawing more and more people to the well. Merchants, travelers, and even skeptics who had heard the whispers of a man offering living water came to see for themselves. The town, once quiet and divided, buzzed with anticipation and curiosity. The woman watched as faces from different walks of life, Jews and Samaritans alike, gathered near the well, their eyes filled with wonder and expectation. Jesus spoke with a voice that carried effortlessly over the crowd, gentle yet commanding attention. "Whoever drinks of the water I give will never thirst again," he said. This water is not just for today, not just for your body, it is for your soul, for eternity. Whoever seeks it will find life, hope, and peace beyond what you have known. Some in the crowd murmured among themselves, skeptical but intrigued. They had lived with suspicion and division all their lives, believing that people from different backgrounds could never truly unite. Yet here, by the well, they saw a man who treated everyone with dignity, who listened without judgment and spoke with authority born of love. The woman noticed how the crowd began to shift. Barriers that had seemed unbreakable, long-held prejudices, mistrust, and fear, started to crumble. Neighbors who had avoided each other were now standing side by side, listening, asking questions, and sharing their thoughts. She realized that her encounter had not only changed her life but had ignited a transformation in the hearts of many. Jesus continued, teaching about God's kingdom, about love that transcends boundaries, and about faith that opens the heart. Do not think that you are defined by the divisions around you, he said. Your heritage, your past, your mistakes, they do not determine your worth. God sees the heart. Worship in spirit and truth, and you will find the life you have been seeking. The woman's heart swelled as she watched the city awaken to this new truth. She remembered her own doubts, her fears, and the weight of her past. Now, she saw others experiencing a similar awakening, a release from shame, a spark of hope, and the courage to believe in something greater than themselves. By evening, the crowd had dispersed, but the energy lingered. Families walked home talking quietly about the man at the well and the living water he offered. Children skipped alongside their parents, repeating the words they had heard, unaware of the depth of the message but carrying the joy of the day in their hearts. The woman returned to her home, tired but elated. She reflected on how one encounter had shifted not only her own life but the entire city's perspective. She realized that the living water Jesus offered was more than a promise, it was a revolution of the heart, breaking down walls that had seemed permanent and filling hearts with hope, acceptance, and love. That night, as she lay down to rest, she understood the profound lesson of her encounter: faith and love are not limited by tradition, past mistakes, or social divisions. One person's openness to God's truth could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond what anyone could imagine. And in that realization, she found a peace that would stay with her forever, a reminder that true transformation begins with a single encounter, a single act of trust, and a heart willing to receive God's living water. Days turned into weeks, but the memory of the encounter at Jacob's well remained vivid in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. The woman, once isolated and burdened by shame, had become a beacon of hope in Sychar. She walked through the streets with a new confidence, greeting neighbors and travelers alike, sharing the story of the living water that had refreshed her soul. Jesus continued to teach near the well, his words drawing crowds from far and wide. But even when he was not present, the lessons he had imparted lingered in the community. People began to care for one another in new ways, breaking old prejudices and offering help without judgment. Differences that had once separated Jews and Samaritans became less significant in the face of shared faith and understanding. The woman watched as families, merchants, and travelers discussed the teachings she had first shared with them. She saw young men helping the elderly carry goods, neighbors inviting each other into their homes, and even former skeptics offering words of encouragement to those who were unsure. A quiet transformation was taking place, not just in Sychar, but in the hearts of everyone who had experienced the living water Jesus spoke of. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the well, the woman reflected on her journey. She remembered the fear and isolation that had once defined her life. She remembered the weight of judgment and the sting of rejection. And then she remembered the moment Jesus had looked at her with understanding and compassion, offering her a gift that went beyond water, a gift of acceptance, of love, and of eternal life. She realized that her encounter was not just a personal salvation, it was a catalyst for an awakening in the entire community. People who had been strangers or even enemies were now united by a shared hope. Walls of mistrust and division had been replaced by bridges of faith and friendship. And in every conversation she overheard, in every act of kindness she witnessed, she saw the ripple effect of that one transformative moment at the well. As evening fell, the woman sat quietly by the well, the cool water reflecting the colors of the sunset. She understood the depth of what had happened. Not only had she been changed, but the town itself had been touched by the living water Jesus offered. It was a reminder that God's love could reach anyone, regardless of their past, their mistakes, or the divisions around them. She thought of the lessons she had learned, the courage to face one's own past, the willingness to believe in something greater, and the importance of sharing that hope with others. And she knew that this story, the story of a woman, well, and a man who spoke of living water, would continue to flow, touching hearts for generations to come. In that moment, she felt a profound peace settle over her. The barriers had been broken, the hearts had been opened, and the living water continued to flow, unseen yet powerful, transforming lives one soul at a time. Sichar was no longer just a town divided by history and prejudice, it had become a place of awakening, of hope, and of faith, a testament to the power of love, acceptance, and the enduring gift of God's grace. And as the woman rose to leave, she carried with her a simple truth that would remain forever: no matter who you are, no matter your past, the living water of God's love is available to all who seek it, and its ripple can change the world.